Well, I wonder how we got here because getting to your point about, the metalcore scene or hardcore scene and stuff back in the day, people always butted heads about that stuff, which is totally fine. Like,
I was always worried about getting beat up because I was a smoker. I was a small
well,
kid.
yeah.
I'm like a small kid. I'm like, I'm going to see Earth Crisis, and I'm hoping that I can get to my car, get from my car to Pearl Street and back without some vegan militant dude that's got got to prove to his buddies that he's more vegan militant straight edge than his friends, and kicks the crap out of the little guy smoking a Marlboro. That's what I was worried about.
Especially in that like New England scene back then. That was it was the Wild West.
When Earth Crisis jumped on the scene, and it was, or not Earth, I'm sorry, not Earth Crisis. When Hatebreed jumped on the scene and they were not a straight edge hardcore band, I was like, thank God. Thank God they're a good hardcore band with cool dudes that don't hate me just because I'm a metal guy that smokes cigarettes. Jamie's like booking my band, and I'm like, I'm so glad you guys are like normal dudes.
Yeah. Well, so what is your kind of relationship with hardcore? Because, a lot of people, I think, maybe forget how much hardcore and that early metalcore scene kind of went hand in hand. Like Killswitch and Overcast and Shadows Fall, and like all those bands came up in the hardcore, God Forbid, Lamb of God, all came from the hardcore scene. And I think that's been kind of lost now. What is your connection to all that?
So I was really into, like, I was a metal kid. Right from the beginning, I was in death metal, and Iron Maiden is what got me my start. Like, there are dudes that get into, they got it. Their older brother showed them punk bands, and that was kind of their thing, and that's what gets them into hardcore and into metalcore. And my journey into metalcore, or my journey into the music scene, was through metal. So it was Poison, Def Leppard when I was a youngster, to Iron Maiden when I was early teens, Metallica when I was 13, 14, and then 16, 17, it was death metal and Carcass and Entombed and Grave and Cannibal Corpse, Suffocation. Like, all that stuff is how I got into it. And so when we heard At the Gates in New England, when we heard At the Gates and Slaughter the Soul came around, and I went and I saw At the Gates, it was me and John Donay, and there was like, and Matt Pichon from Shadows Fall, and there was like 20 people at the show. It was like, it's in Northampton. Right. And it's in the 90s, and metal's basically dead. And the only reason these bands could come to the US is, first of all, a lot of Swedish and Europe, well, not Swedish, but not just Swedish, but a lot of European bands Scandinavian bands had state support. So they're exporting their culture, so they would get paid to be in a band because they're making Swedish metal or whatever. And so they would come over, and most of the shows would kind of be bunk, but then you'd have to play bigger shows in big cities, and they were okay. So it was worth their time. So I remember seeing those shows, and we were all listening to the same kind of stuff, but you'd have people like Scott Lee putting, you'd have At the Gates, and he would put Hatebreed on the show, or Earth Crisis, or local hardcore bands. And for all of us, it was really normal, especially in Western Mass, because as much as I talk about straight edge bands and stuff, that was not the predominant thing in Western Mass. There was areas in Boston, and there was some in New York and stuff, and some bands from New York, but in Western Mass, like, all of us were really, really, really cool. Like, all the guys that were in Shadows Fall and Killswitch and Flatline, Mike Martin's old band, and the guys in Unearth and stuff, like, we were all really tight, and there was none of that drama at all. Like, it was so awesome because everybody just felt like everybody wanted to be friends. And then, if hardcore bands or whatever straight edge bands came into town, it was people that came into town from out of town that were not super cool. Because, it's Northampton, Massachusetts. It's where Smith College is. It's where, it's where Amherst College is. And it was as progressive as you got in the 90s, right? Like, that was the area. So it was super cool and awesome to be around. And so, like I said, for me, it was from metal. But we were playing the same shows with a lot of those bands. We would go to see Snapcase and Earth Crisis and Hatebreed or Machine Head with, whoever's on tour. And it was a very normal thing. It wasn't something that we had to think a lot about. It was just like, oh, I like that. Oh, cool. I like that too. And we just kind of put that stuff together in the stuff that we wrote.
I thought it was cool that back then you could go to a show and you could see a vegan straight edge band with a ska band and a death metal band, and whatever, some random local pop punk band. And it was like wild, and maybe a Krishna band or something, wildly different in terms of music, wildly different in terms of ideologies. People could like bitterly disagree and still be on the same bill together.
Yeah.
And I feel like that's totally gone. I mean, you think about like someone like Pete Steele or let alone SOD,